How's everybody this morning? Good. Seriously? I feel like it's my duty to tell the 11 o'clock crowd that if you couldn't make 9:30 today, you're not making it. You got an extra hour last night. My wife and I, she's not here, so I'll share this with you. For me, I love tricking myself into thinking I'm getting an extra hour. So she needs to understand that the time doesn't change till like 2 a.m. So we're hanging out last night. We're introducing our boys to Goonies in the TV room last night, which was awesome. We're watching Goonies, and if you haven't seen that, you need to. And it's 9:45, old time, and she starts changing the clock. Like, I don't need to see that. I need to think that when I get up in the morning, I'm like, oh, wait, it's not that late. Anyway, that's just us. If the smartphones work automatically, but she insists on changing the clocks. And sometimes you have to decide what your battles are going to be. And this is one of mine. So I've thought through this well. And I'm glad that you're here today. If you're new to Epic today, welcome, as you've already hopefully been welcome. If you're new even over the last several months, I want to personally invite you to our next 1.0 experience, not this Friday, but next Friday, 6:30 to 8:30 right here. A great time will be had by all. Free meal. There's kids programming if you have children. Our staff will be here. A number of our leaders will be here, as well as lots of other new people. And it'll be a great time just to have these kinds of questions answered. How did Epic begin as a church? What is really important to us as a church? Where are we headed as a church? And how can you be involved in what God's up to in this church? And so we'd love to get a chance just to spend extra time with you. On Sunday mornings, you can look around and see how the service is laid out. We're not just hanging out a ton, except between services. And so it'd be a great time to answer some of your questions, to be able to get you to know what's going on here and how you could play a part in that. And one of the big things I'll let you in on is that we believe that it's great to come in anonymously, but we believe God calls us into community, and then he sends us as a community on mission. And so that's why we started this church. That's why we push small groups. That's why we think you being attached to what God's doing here gives you a much better chance of thriving in life than you staying distant and anonymous. And so let me just encourage that in kind of this gentle but yet firm way. I want to encourage you towards attaching yourself to this church or wherever you might feel God is leading you if you're still on that quest. We're in the middle of this series called Found, and the big idea of this series is that every single one of us are searching some place, for something that will take care of our ultimate desires and be ultimately satisfying to us. And I'm willing to bet that every single one of us in this room, and when I say things like this, I'm sure someone's like, no, Ben, I'm the exception. I'm willing to bet that every single one of us in this room have at some point in our life said, if I could just find the right man or the right woman for me, my life would be set, right? And everybody ever said that? Some of you are like, Ben, I get more specific than that. I'm like, if Sarah would just say yes, my life would be well taken care of, or however the case may be. Because what we do is we tell ourselves, if we could just find the right man, or if we could just find the right woman, nothing else would matter. Like, it wouldn't matter where we have to live, right? It wouldn't matter what job I had, because at the end of the day, I would be going home to Mr. Perfect, and who cares? It wouldn't matter how little money I had in the bank, because after all, we would be living on love. And we would be set. We would be set. Has anyone ever made a terrible relational decision in your life? Has anyone never made a terrible relational decision in your life? Just want everyone to know we're in good company here. This is probably not a good time to look to the man or woman sitting beside you when that question's asked. And I'll give you permission right now just to say, baby, that's not you. Someone else long time ago. It is amazing to think of our list of regrets during our lifetime, how much shorter that list would get if we could only remove the relational regrets we have, right? Not just the romantic relationship, just this relational regrets we have from our past. It seems for me like that the list of regrets, however long it may be, if we could just remove the relational regrets, it's amazing how shorter that list would get. In fact, the things that I regret most in my life, I assume the things that you might regret most in your life are those relational regrets. I hate that the solo things, what they did to me, but in the relational regrets, it did something to me and it did something to at least one other person. And in many cases, it did something to lots of people. And so, what we typically regret, many of us, once we get out of a relationship, isn't it amazing how much clarity of eyesight we have about that person or the relationship? Isn't it amazing? But we don't have that till we get it. Like when we get it, like, oh, of course that didn't work. But in the middle of it, we see that clearly too, don't we? No, it's like and so here's what I think. Sometimes we think that we have made terrible relational choices, and some of you have, right? Some of us have made terrible relational choices, but I want to let you know that the number one thing I think when it comes to relationships, I don't think our number one problem or number one issue has to do with the choices that we've made. And as much as we would love to throw that person's picture on a dartboard and just shred it, right? Just tear it to shreds. I don't think the person that most of us have chosen has been our biggest mistake when it comes to relationships. As I decided to talk about this relationship thing today along this idea of what we're trying to find our ultimate satisfaction in, I know that we're all over the relational map this morning, and I won't ask you to raise your hand for this, okay? It won't be like, hey, who's single, who's divorced, who's married, who's looking for Mr. Right? I'm not going to ask those kinds of things. When I think about those sort of teaching series, I think, how can I speak to the person who is single and at the same time have something to say that the person in a terrible marriage, to the engaged couple, to the person who's divorced and trying to find love again, or to the person who never wants to find love again? Because let's face it, there are some people in this room who are single and longing for that perfect relationship to come along. We'll pray for you. We do all the time. There are other people in this room who are single and never want to be in a relationship again. Again, you don't need to raise your hand because then someone in the crowd will want to prove you wrong and they'll come after you, okay? And you don't want to do that. And don't raise your hand on this one for sure, but there are some of us in the room who are married and wish we were single. I say some of us just in that general sense, not literally putting myself in that camp. And there are some of you who are in thriving relationships right now. Can't imagine it going any better. You've found the right guy, the right girl, and so your things are great. But I do believe our message for today is the same for every single one of those relational stages. And I hope to prove that or help you see it at least over the next 30 minutes. If you have a Bible, I would love for us to look at John chapter 4, an encounter that Jesus has with a woman. If you need a Bible, raise your hand and we'll get one into your hands, and this is yours to keep. If you don't have a Bible or you want this one for whatever reason, we'd love for you to take it home with you, and it's yours to keep. But I believe no matter where you are in the relational stage of life, no matter what your desires are, no matter what your track record of relationships is, I believe that Jesus has something he wants to say to us this morning. And I believe for those of you in great marriages and those of you that have never been in one and those of you that have had 3 marriages, no matter where you are, I believe that the answer is actually the same. Now, I think the specifics matter. If I was speaking to a group of single adults, young adults, or older adults, I would have a pointed message with the specifics. Or if I was talking to marriages that were struggling, I would give you some things that I wouldn't give the whole crowd. But what I want to give the entire crowd this morning really is what's for all of us, no matter where we are. And just to set up this moment, Jesus has been doing a lot of ministry in the region of Judea, and so much so that the Pharisees are beginning to get wind that he's baptizing more people than John. Oh no. And so they're thinking about coming after him. So he escapes Judea. He's headed to Galilee, but he has to go through the region of Samaria. He finds himself at a well in a small town called Sychar, and that's where we enter the scene. If you'll stand with me, John chapter 4, verses 7 through 18. We'll have it on the screens if you need to be able to see it there. So he's at a well, the town of Sychar. Jesus is exhausted, and don't miss that. He is depleted. He is worn out. He is just like we are when we're exhausted. He's hungry. He's tired. He's thirsty. And it makes this conversation with this woman all the more amazing to me. It says, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." Oh no. The woman answered him, "I have no husband." She's feeling good about herself. Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands." Everybody's feeling well about their relational situation, no? "And the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." You may be seated. When we read back through the scriptures, especially encounters that Jesus had in the first century, sometimes we miss the aha or the surprise or the shock because we're reading it on the back end and we're looking that way. But this conversation that Jesus has with this woman, it is full of surprise for this woman, and it's full of surprise for his disciples when they show up with the Happy Meals. All right? When they come back, they're amazed. I think you can go to verse 27. They're amazed that Jesus is speaking with this woman. And this encounter is packed with so much. Just let me name a few of the things that were incredibly surprising for her. The first thing is that Jews had nothing to do with Samaritans. Jews thought they were better than Samaritans. There was this massive racial divide, separation, segregation between Jews and Samaritans. And so before we even get to Jewish man, Samaritan woman, just a Jew and a Samaritan alone wouldn't have done anything to be together in normal circumstances, wouldn't have had conversations, certainly wouldn't have been pleasant or made sincere offerings to one another. Not only that, but Jesus is not just a Jew, he's a Jewish man. And what I've come to understand over this week is that Jewish men didn't speak to any women in public, even their own wives. Some of your wives are like, "I wish my husband wouldn't say so much to me," especially in public. He's so loud when he's talking about other, maybe that's just my wife that says that to me. I'm like, "Shauna, they can't hear me. I'm whispering." She's like, "No, they can. Look at them." But Jewish men weren't allowed to speak to any women, even their wives. So it's very shocking for her before she knows anything else. And you're going to see the surprise just keep building for her. Right now, she is just stunned that a Jewish man is talking to her, a Samaritan woman. Just stunned. The disciples come back, they're stunned. It says that they chose not to say anything to Jesus about that. It's like the one time they kept their mouth closed. But they're stunned when they come back to see Jesus speaking to a woman, because they were good Jewish boys and men, and they knew that you didn't do that publicly with a Samaritan woman. And so I love that Jesus shows up and just tears through our stereotypes. And so some of you walked in the room today with stereotypes about the way your life should go, about the way things should work, and perhaps he wants to meet you in that kind of unexpected way like he does with this woman. Jesus begins to use a lot of imagery along the lines of thirst and water. I assume you see that in the early part of the conversation. And it was mysterious to her. She didn't understand it. She thinks the whole time he's speaking about physical water and physical thirst. And had we not seen the back end, we would assume the same. It's very mysterious what Jesus is saying to her. But look at verses 16 through 18, and you will understand why he uses the water and thirst imagery and analogy. In 16 through 18, after they have this whole conversation that we'll revisit about water and thirst and the well and living water, but to understand why he framed that conversation the way he did, look at verses 16 through 18. Jesus says, "Go call your husband and come back here." She's like, "I don't have a husband." And I don't know how Jesus knows all this. Like, is this the God part of him? Is this the man part of him? I don't know how he knows all this, but he's like, "You're right. You don't have a husband." Way to go. You've had 5 husbands, and now the guy that you're still living with isn't your husband. She's like, Isn't it always fun to be found out? Don't you love that? I mean, didn't some of us move here so no one would know us? Anybody else? And so he knows everything about her. And so now let's go back and revisit the thirst water conversation. The imagery that he uses makes sense. And he kind of goes in and out from talking about physical water to spiritual water. And I want to make sure that we don't miss this. The reason Jesus framed the conversation using this imagery is because he knows that every human being that he ever created, which is all of them, by the way, every single one, the scriptures say, all things were created by him, through him, and for him. Don't miss that. He knows that every human being that he has ever created, we all have this deep longing within us. He knows that about this woman, and he knows exactly what she's looking for to quench her thirst. And by the way, he knows exactly what you're looking for this morning to quench your thirst. We all have this kind of deep longing for something else. Jesus knows that, and he knows what she's been looking to. He tells us in verses 16 through 18, she keeps looking to some man to finally do for her, what she longs to have done for her, to quench that soul thirst she has in her soul. And Jesus began out of that, he's using the thirst water imagery. So let's just look at some things that he says to her. In verse 10, he says to her, if you knew the gift of God. I love when you encounter Jesus. He doesn't do what so many even Christians have done in situations like this, right? He doesn't start condemning her. He doesn't say, do you think the sixth time will be a charm, right? He doesn't say to her, I can't believe you. He doesn't hand her a book to read on relationships, though that's great. He doesn't send her to the church counselor, though I think that's awesome. He doesn't do any of that. He says to her, the reason that you keep going to those guys to satisfy your thirst is because you simply don't know the gift of God. It's an ignorance issue, not in a dumb or stupid issue, but it's ignorance. She just doesn't know. And because that longing's present in all of us, when we don't know what is being offered to us in the person of Jesus, we will go search to have that quenched somewhere. And every one of us in this room, by the way, you're in a season of life, and this will be true 10 years from now and 40 years from now, you're in a season of life where you're looking to something or someone to have your thirst quenched. And if you want to help yourself out this morning, at least in your own heart and mind, it would be good to acknowledge and own what that is that you're looking to quench your thirst. Jesus knows. So he says to her, listen, he just knows. Because she hasn't yet embraced the gift of God being offered to her, she's got to go find it somewhere else. And while relationships or other people might not be your thing, you might be looking to quench your thirst with work or with status or approval or having kids. Whatever the case may be, we're all trying to quench our thirst with something or someone. And Jesus speaks to her about that. So he says, if you only knew the gift of God, you wouldn't have answered me about the physical water. You would have begged me for this living water. This living water idea, I think, is massive. So she's getting well water. Jesus is talking to her about living water. 2 weeks ago, I know you're like, Ben, we don't remember what you said 2 minutes ago. But 2 weeks ago, we talked out of Jeremiah chapter 2, and I said that there are three kinds of water that are being referenced in this culture. The bottom shelf water is this idea of cistern water. By the way, I realized one of my friends had cistern water before, and no, he's not that old. He drank some cistern water. But cistern water is that wastewater, or it's that runoff water. It's the water that's got the nasty mosquito stuff inside it. It's the water that you only use as a last resort because there's nothing else around. That's cistern water. One layer up is groundwater or well water. So this is pretty good source, but you have to constantly keep going and taking care of it and come back and get it. So it's a pretty good source of water. But then the top shelf water is this living water, this water that's a part of a never-ending supply. It's from a fresh source, and it's constant. And so Jesus says to her about physical water and about spiritual water, and he's saying both things to her. Here's what he's saying physically. He's saying to her, if you had access to living water, like in your backyard or somewhere around where you live, in the village that you live in, you wouldn't keep doing what? You wouldn't keep making daily trips to the well. He's just using a physical reality initially, and then he's going to go beyond it. But he's wanting her to see. And so she's like, yeah, if I had living water, I would go for it. I wouldn't have to keep coming to this well. Later on in the text, she's going to say to Jesus, Jesus, give me some of this living water. And she's still thinking that he's speaking only in the physical realm. So understand it just physically first before we get into the deeper meaning. Physically, this woman wouldn't have to walk to the well with her water bucket every single day if she had access to living water or to a fresh spring water at her house. And so he's starting to help her understand the analogy. Here's what he's saying to her in the spiritual realm. Listen, you keep looking to these men. That's just like you going to this well day after day after day. You haven't found it yet. And he's like, but if you would have asked me, I would have given you living water. You would not be going to the well if you had living water. And Jesus doesn't try to argue with her. He knows that if we don't have living water, it makes sense for us to find a well to go get some water, right? And that's what some of us are doing. So a great question to let churn through your mind already is, what well are you visiting to quench your thirst? What well are you visiting to quench your thirst? And then Jesus talks about this idea of continual thirst. Look at verse 13. He says, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. She's not surprised to hear that. She's thinking physically. She knows she'll show up tomorrow. The same people who come to this well every day will show up tomorrow or 2 days from now, or whenever their water runs out. She's like, of course, everyone who drinks of this will be thirsty again. But Jesus is saying what? Everyone who looks to something besides him to quench their thirst, they will keep going to that well time and time and time again. So here's how we do it, no matter if it's a relationship or whatever. If it's a relationship thing for us, we say, listen, I know I was a fool with those 6 women, but number 7's going to finally do it for me, right? I just went for the wrong ones. And we've all gone for the wrong ones before, right? Really? 6 of us. Listen, I knew I was going for one of the wrong ones when I was dating this girl in college. And she wrote this poem for me, and she put it on blue paper, printed it, like, I don't know, we were using typewriters still back in the day. I know, 99, or even earlier. She wrote this poem, and she framed it, and she gave it to me, just like super heartfelt. And I started reading it, and I was like, that doesn't sound like me. The reality is, months before, she had dated our worship pastor, Brad. She wrote the poem for him and never had a chance to give it to him. Like, this was a bad decision. It was a bad decision. Brad and I have both made great relational choices since. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't play the guitar. What are you talking about? That's not me. Some of us have just made terrible relational choices. And some of you are even in a season right now saying about your current significant other, your spouse, like if they would just get their act together in a few ways, then I would have everything I need. And maybe they need to get their act together. Or others of you that aren't in relationships right now, you say, but the next one, it will be the one that does it for me. It'll actually take care of this thirst. And I just want to ask this question, and maybe we'll have some fun with it, but we don't know anything about these 5, now 6 men, or really anything about this woman, okay? And so ladies, I want you, listen, it's not in the Bible, so you can have some fun with this, okay? Let's use our imaginations. Ladies, tell us why those relationships didn't work out. Because the things you can say in church about the man. What do you think was wrong with the men or the relationship? Ladies? I'm giving you a chance to speak in church. I mean, listen. It's not every Sunday occurrence. Those men must have been what? Selfish. They couldn't, they were watching football when she was trying to talk to them. They didn't listen to her. They stayed way too long at work. And guys, what do you think the issue was? She just, all right, there it is. All right, there's a one-sided conversation the rest of the morning, okay, people? We don't know anything about the women, and we don't know this woman, and we don't know anything about the men. It would be easy for us to speculate and go, oh, she just needed to find the right one. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's absolutely true. But it would not have mattered how great and awesome those guys were or how good she was in the relationships. A relationship and another human being cannot take center stage. They cannot quench the thirst that every one of us have deep inside our soul. So some of you are saying, I chose the wrong person, or she's just not getting her act together or his act together. Here's the reality. If they're becoming the center of your heart, they don't have what it takes to be there. You're like, but Ben, you should see her. Doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. She doesn't have it. He doesn't have it. It's just not there. Jesus talks about this continual thirst. He says, everyone who drinks from this, who keeps drinking, who keeps saying to themselves, this will do it for me, everyone has to keep coming back or has to find a new well. I'm not saying you haven't made poor choices. I'm just saying I don't think that's the apex of the issue for us. And some of us, think about the reverse. Not only are we looking to find this in another person, some of us are looking for another person who will find us at the center, right? Doesn't that sound wonderful? Find another human being that would put you at the center, worship the ground you walk on, look to you to give them never-ending joy, be your everything, like they would never leave your side. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Some of us love that, like, I just want him to make me the center. You know what that would be? That would be exhausting. You know what that would be? That would be heavy. Do you know what it would be for another human being to look to you to get everything they need, to have every thirst they have quenched from you? Do you know, no matter how amazing you might be, do you know how heavy and exhausting that would get? And some of you are in those relationships right now. At the beginning, you thought it was cute, and then you were just enamored by it, and now you're tired of it. In the beginning, you didn't want them to have any other friends, and you wanted to be the main thing, and now you're like, could I buy you some friends, right? Can Have you met so-and-so? It's exhausting when you're the person that someone else is looking to be their everything, no matter how amazing you are. It's just exhausting. But now imagine with me that this woman does get married for the 6th time. But she gets married for the first time, not looking to a man to quench her ultimate thirst. What if Jesus begins to satisfy her in the ways that he describes, not me, but the way that he describes? And what happens if her husband is also finding his deepest thirst quenched by Jesus himself? Can you imagine the grace that might exist in a marriage like that? Can you imagine the freedom and faithfulness that might exist in a marriage like that? Why? Because they're no longer seeing each other as the problem, because they're no longer looking to each other to give them what only Jesus can give them. And some of you, listen, you might be married to an amazing man or an amazing woman, or you may be dating an amazing man or amazing woman, or you might have your sights set on an amazing man or an amazing woman, but they're just not that amazing. But imagine how incredible the relationship can be when you're both looking to Christ himself to satisfy the deepest longings in you. Listen, I think it matters who you choose. Please hear me say that. I think you need to enjoy being around each other. I think if faith is an important part to you, it probably needs to be some part to them. I think it matters that your values and aspirations come close to matching their values and aspirations. I think those things are really important. But it doesn't matter how incredible all that matches up, and you take some test online and it says you're 1,000% compatible, and you think you found the perfect person, and they're just not that perfect. They can't be. So don't put an unfair weight on them. But imagine what it would be like in that situation. And so here's the thing. We want to walk away with advice going, okay, Ben, if I'm single, what do I do? If I'm in a terrible marriage, what do I do? Ben, if I'm married and wish I was single, if I'm loving marriage, what do I do? The answer is the same for 100% of us. You drink from the kind of water that can satisfy your deepest thirst. Yes, there's some things we should improve relationally. We'll probably get to that eventually next year. But where it starts, I think what's foundational is that we look to Jesus to do what he can do, and then we can look to that person to look what God's called them to do. I think that's how it can work. Otherwise, we walk around going, oh, I have a spouse problem or I have a bad choice problem. What if you just have a bad source problem? Now, the other side of this is when the relationship becomes an afterthought, right? So some of you in the room, you're like, oh, Ben, I don't have relationships at the center. Ben, it doesn't. Remember, my marriage doesn't even make the page. Listen, not only do relationships not need to be in the center, if Jesus doesn't take center place, all of you men and all of you women, something else will, and it will have a profound ruining effect on your relationships. If approval is the thing that you care about most, it will have a negative effect on your relationships. If status or work or wealth or selfishness, like you are the center, all of those things will end up ruining your relationship. So while it shouldn't be the first central thought in your heart, it doesn't need to be an afterthought or on the back burner either. And some of you need to reorganize some things in your lives. I'm not asking you to build your life around your wife or your husband or whoever, but I am saying as you build it around Jesus, they will end up in the proper place as well, and you'll see everything flourishing relationally for your life, which I want to see. I'll never forget when I met Shauna, I really thought she would solve the rest of my life issues. I really did. Like, seriously. So I was dating this girl I mentioned earlier whenever I met Shauna, and I just said to myself, if girls like Shauna exist, what am I doing with this other girl? That's a true story. So I ended that relationship before anything else. No, I wasn't the cheating pastor. Wasn't a pastor at the time, all right? Nor was I cheating. True stories. Boys, I'm telling the truth, okay? But I did in that relationship. I did begin to pursue a relationship with Shauna. I really thought that could be awesome, and I was convinced that she would think it would be awesome too. But as we're trying to decide if we're going to move forward into a relationship, she's like, oh, I think God wants me to be a missionary. I'm like, well, he told me, that I need more help than those people over in France, is what she was looking at the time. But I began to pursue her, and I'll never forget, I don't know, a month and a half into this, she wrote me an email, AOL, so it was more like this, and it was dial-up. It went longer than that. And the email said this simply, it's 1999. It said, Ben, I know what I want, the ball's in your court. And I was like, life is over, boom. I really thought she would be, like, I thought we would have nothing but adventure, we'd make some beautiful babies, which we did. And I was set. That it wouldn't matter where I worked. It wouldn't matter the problems I encountered. It wouldn't matter where we lived. It wouldn't matter. I really believe that she would take care of all the major things that would ever happen in life. And what I've learned over the almost 14 years, December will be 14 years for us. What I've learned over these years is this: she is an amazing woman. I was right. Better than I deserve, still true. But she isn't able to do for me what only God can do for me. And it's amazing what happens when the pressure goes off of her and it goes off of me, when we begin to encourage one another. Listen, I'm here to support you. I'm here to pray for you, but let me ask you to lean into Christ himself rather than leaning into me alone during this time. I think it matters how you treat each other. I think it matters how you should be each other's number one support in terms of earthly relationships. But it's amazing what we've learned over the last several years, just going, hey, I can't do for you what only God can, but I'm here to help point you in that direction. And some of you right now, it's not a spouse problem. It's a source problem. And I want to finish just by asking 3 questions out of this text and out of our message this morning. The first question is this: what is the well that you continue to go to? You are going to a well. You are headed to some place to quench your thirst. And I just want you to be honest with yourself. What is the well you continually go to? Second thing I want you to ask yourself is, do you see what Jesus is like from this encounter? Do you see what Jesus is like? Let me just remind you of what state of physical mindset he's in. He's exhausted. He's been doing ministry. He's been traveling. He's hungry. He's thirsty. And yet he makes her this incredible offer when he's depleted himself. So much so the disciples come back with the happy meals. They say to Jesus, it's time for you to eat yours. And Jesus says in verse 34 of this chapter, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. The thing that this lady must have been amazed by is that Jesus offers her something when he's depleted himself. It's a foreshadowing to me of the cross. When Jesus is most exhausted, when he's most in physical need, when he's most in physical pain, he's making the apex offer in all of human history. And if that offer doesn't stir you this morning, if it doesn't make you go, wow, I want you to continue to reflect on that and continue to believe that this is who he is. So what well do you keep going to? Do you see what Jesus is like? And 3, who is Jesus to you? Who is Jesus to you? There's an amazing progression what she finds Jesus to be in this chapter. Let me just I'll highlight it and you can go back and look at it. In verse 9, she finds him to be a Jewish man, but it doesn't stop there. In verse 19, she finds him to be a prophet, which is a little bit more than a Jewish man because he's foretelling about how things are going to go. But in verses 25 and 26, she finds him revealing himself as the thirst-quenching Messiah. Not a bad progression in a short amount of time. Like, oh, what is a Jewish man doing talking to me? What is a prophet doing here? I'm waiting for the Messiah. And he says to her, I who speak to you, I'm that guy. Who is he to you? As long as he's a Sunday thing, probably not much effect. As long as he's simply a good teacher, I don't know how that's going to make a huge difference in your life. As long as he's secondary or just one of the things you look to quench your thirst, I think there will continue to be issues in all other realms of life. The reason our vision as a church here is to orient our entire lives around Jesus is because there's nothing else worthy and there's nothing else that works if we orient our lives around that. So what's your well? Do you comprehend what Jesus is like? Who is he to you? Who is he to you? Would you pray with me?